All right, thank you very much. All right, well, I was glad to see that farmers rose to the top of the science wall, and how to integrate our science with what farmers are doing and how they can integrate what we're doing into their systems really rose to the top, because that's a big part of what this project is about, is understanding what farmers think about climate change. And so the rationale behind this survey, which is pretty much has taken up all of my time over the last year and a half, 2 years, is that, and it's also the rationale underlying this project, right? So agriculture is vulnerable to climate change. It's also a source of the greenhouse gases that contribute to climate change. One of the things that we probably don't talk about enough, but one of the main reasons why we're worried about climate change in agriculture, is that threats to agriculture associated with climate change are also threats to society and quality of life on a global and local scale. And so really calls are spreading across the world, really thinking about, we've got to be serious about considering the ramification of climate change to agriculture and find some solutions, adaptive and mitigative solutions. So really the big research question underlying the survey that we've just recently actually got the data, finally clean data, about 2 weeks ago, so this is hot off the presses of NASS, National Agricultural Statistics Service, who did the survey for us, is that we don't really understand much about what farmers think about climate change and how they may or may not need to react to climate change. And the social, psychological, and psychological research really has shown over a long period of time that beliefs really are the foundation of behavior. Belief structure about how the world is and how the world should be really shapes the attitudes we have toward different kind of behaviors that we might take, decisions that we might take about what we're going to do. And particularly in the natural hazards research, a lot of the decisions to adapt or mitigate depends on beliefs about a given hazard, a given risk, or what are the characteristics of a given risk, and then perceptions of risk perceptions given or regarding that particular hazard. And so if we bring this down to agriculture, if farmers or any of us don't believe that climate change is happening or don't perceive it as a risk, it's really not very likely that we're going to undertake any adaptive or mitigative action. So that was really kind of the rationale behind the survey. I'm just really quickly going to show you the conceptual framework underlying the survey. There's a lot of stuff going on here, a lot of moving parts. Since this is preliminary analysis I'm presenting, I'm only going to be talking about the blue circles. So really the way we're conceiving of this is that beliefs about climate change are related to concerns or perceived risks regarding climate change, and then those are related in some way to perceptions or attitudes toward adaptive and mitigative action. And so so the primary research question underlying this particular presentation is, what are the relationships between farmer beliefs about climate change, perceptions of climate change related risk, and attitudes toward adaptation and mitigation? So do farmers believe that climate change is occurring? Are they concerned about potential impacts on agriculture, on their operations or in general? And do they support individual and collective adaptive and mitigative actions? Okay, so just a little background on the survey itself. Had a great team working with me on this. John Tyndall is in the back, several other folks from ISU, and then also a group from Purdue and also Nebraska. The names are all on the poster number 24 over there. I hope you'll stop by later on. But I just want to recognize that a lot of people worked on this and have contributed to its quality. It was a partnership primarily with the NIFA-funded U2U, or Useful to Usable project out of Purdue. USDA, NIFA asked the CAP projects to really orient toward each other and look for potential complementarities, ways that we could collaborate. And so when we got the award and this other project got the award, we talked to each other and realized we had some very similar objectives in our survey research. So we looked toward combining funds, talked to Marianne Rosum. She thought it could be a good idea. And in the end, we decided to combine funds. We were able to get some more funds from other projects. Joe Coletti was kind enough to kick in some dollars, got some from NRCS. So it's been a really broad-scale collaborative project. In terms of sampling, we really wanted to be able to generalize to the largest amount of corn acreage possible. So we selected the 22 watersheds. Well, we actually had 25 watersheds, but we only had enough money for 22. So the 22 highest corn production and soybean production watersheds in the U.S. You can see this map on the right there is a USDA map showing major corn production areas in the U.S. Our watersheds, our 22 watersheds, pretty much overlay that. We represent about 60% of the corn production in the U.S., and we also sampled farmers that have fairly larger scale corn operations, at least 80 acres of corn and $100,000 worth of gross farm revenue. So sent the survey to about 18,800 farmers. We got 4,778 responses from across the Corn Belt, which represents about 26% response rate. So today I'm going to present to you some initial comparisons of perceived risks to agriculture and support for adaptation and mitigation comparisons done by the structure of belief, farmer belief structure about climate change. So first off, we're going to talk about what farmers believe about climate change, what their understanding of climate change is. Do the perceived risks vary by belief, and does support for adaptation and mitigation vary by belief structure? So starting out with beliefs about climate change, we gave them a 5-category answer that they could place themselves in any of 5 categories. We gave them a preamble. There is increasing discussion about climate change and its potential impacts. Please select the statement that best reflects your beliefs about climate change. So we had climate change is occurring and it is caused mostly by human activities. Climate change is occurring and is caused equally by natural changes in the environment and human activities. It's occurring and caused mostly by natural changes in the environment. So about 8% believe that climate change is happening and attributable primarily to human activities. 33% believe it's happening and more or less equally attributable to natural and human sources, and 25% caused mostly by natural changes, but is occurring. About 31% believe that the jury is still out. There's not enough evidence to determine one way or another if climate change is occurring. And then we had about 4% or 3.5% actually that believe that climate change is not occurring. So if we break or kind of look at this by categories, so 66% or 2/3 of our farmers believe climate change is occurring. However, and very importantly, only about 41% believe it is mostly or partially attributable to human activities. And so we'll see that that actually is a very important statistic as we go through the rest of the data. Feel free to ask any clarifying questions as long as they're not too long as I go along. So first off, let's look at some perceived risks. So what we did was developed a number of questions or a number of items based on predicted impacts of climate change on the Corn Belt. So looked to publications from Rick Cruz and some other folks at Iowa State and other Jerry Hatfield, and a number of publications that have been put out in recent years that really kind of lay out what the predictions for the Corn Belt are. And ask them, how concerned are you about the following potential problems for your farm operation? And ask them to rate their concern on a 4-point scale from not concerned at all to very concerned. And so we asked them about drought and heat issues, excess water issues, pest and disease, nutrient loss, and soil erosion. So concerns about drought and heat. We said the items were longer dry periods and drought and increased heat stress on crops. And so I'm presenting these concerns in the order from which they were rated from their percent concerned or very concerned, lump them into one category, and then I'm presenting in order of how they floated to the top. And concerns about drought and heat were highest among our sample. So 59% of farmers on the whole were concerned about longer dry periods and drought, and 52% concerned or very concerned about increased heat stress on crops. And keep in mind, this was a survey done in February and March, so it was before the drought ever happened. But what's really fascinating, I think, about this slide, and this is the first of many that show the very same pattern, farmers who believe that climate change is occurring and is at least due in some part to human activities are much more concerned than those who believe that it's mostly natural, are uncertain, or or who do not believe that climate change is occurring. Can you guys see the bars okay? So over all the way on on the right-hand side of each chart is the whole all farmers category, and all the way on the left-hand side, the blue one is the climate changes happening due to human activity. All right, so concerns about excess water issues. We asked if they're concerned about more frequent extreme rains and increases in saturated soils and ponding. So about half were concerned or very concerned about more frequent and extreme rains, about 41% in saturated soils, concerned about saturated soils and ponding. Again, that same pattern, so 60% of those who believe that climate change is happening and due mostly to human activities, very concerned about more frequent extreme rains, compared to 24% of those who do not believe climate change is happening at all. So you see this pattern emerging. Folks that believe that it's happening and attributable to human activities, quite some concern, but that concern drops precipitously as you move on down that belief scale. We asked about pest and disease. Worries about increased weed pressure, increased insect pressure, higher incidence of crop disease. Same pattern evolving. About half of farmers expressed concern about all of these, but lower than the concerns expressed for drought, but still pretty high. About half of farmers overall, 54% of farmers that believe that climate change is happening and due to human activity, down to about 34%, 40% of the farmers that don't believe climate change is happening. Same again, concerns about soil erosion and nutrient loss. Very similar, although, we're looking at quite a bit of a drop here in level of concern. The drought, remember, was up at about over 60%, and now only about 38% of farmers are concerned about increases in soil erosion stemming ostensibly from increased extreme precipitation, and about 33% worried about increased loss of nutrients into waterways. But again, you see as you get up the belief scale, the more they believe that it's happening, climate change is happening, that it's due to human activity, the more concerned they are. All right, so next area that we're looking at is attitudes toward adaptation and mitigation. And so this is really the nub. This is what we're all about as a project. Our end game really is how can we adapt to changes that are happening? How can we mitigate the different contributions that agriculture's different contributions to drivers of climate change? So what we did was give them a number of normative items, a whole list, and I'm not going to present more than a few of them, but a list of items. It was preceded, or normative items, what should be done and by whom, and we preceded it with a little introductory text. Organizations, agencies, and individuals can do a number of things to prepare for or address potential changes in climate. Please provide your opinions on the following statements. And so this was introduced after the climate change question. So it was clearly now we were talking about climate change. Although, so we asked about farmers, we asked about government agencies, we asked about some NGOs, farmer groups, and that sort of thing. And I'm just going to present on farmers, government, and government. But so support for farm level adaptation. There are a couple of items that we put in there. One of them, farmers should take steps to protect their land from increased weather variability. Note we used weather variability rather than climate change to kind of avoid bias from, so if people don't believe that climate change is happening, they almost could have a bias in the way that they answer the question, so we wanted to avoid that, so we used the term weather variability here. So anyway, farmers should take steps to protect their land from increased weather variability. 66% believe or were strongly agreed with this statement. But as you see, again, you have that very massive variability across the belief categories. 79% of the farmers who believe that climate change is happening and due to mostly to human activity believe that farmers as a whole should take steps, compared to 44% of those who do not believe climate change is happening again. And the next one was I should take steps, that farmer personally should take steps to protect my land from increased weather variability. Still a very high percentage, or a fairly high percentage, 58% agreeing or strongly agreeing with that. And again, you have that very same variability across belief. A couple of additional perspectives on adaptation. We had a few more items in here that they could agree with or disagree with. It's important that farmers adapt to climate change to ensure the long-term success of U.S. agriculture. 64% agree with that. As you see, 82% or 79% of the farmers who believe it's happening and attributable to human activity, at least in some part, agree with that statement. Of course, the ones, I got a white flag. Oh boy. So how many minutes does a white flag mean? What? 2. Okay, I got an extra minute. Thank you. All right, and the same with changing practices to cope with climate change is important to the long-term success of my farm. So that very same pattern occurring there. Institutional responses, we had university extension should do more to help farmers prepare for increased weather variability. State and federal agencies should do more to help farmers prepare for increased weather variability. Quite a bit of support, particularly for extension. We had about 63% on average, but then the farmers who believe that climate change is happening, about 3/4 of them believe extension should help. State and federal agencies a little less support there, but still quite a few farmers think that we should have some sort of collective level. And this is for collective and individual mitigation, support for collective and individual mitigation, a really important one. Government should do more to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And this is where that difference by belief really comes into play. And you would expect this, right? So farmers who do not believe that climate change is occurring certainly aren't supportive, at least not very many of them are supportive of mitigation that involves changing human behavior, because of course humans aren't having any impact, right? But if you look at, the folks that do believe climate change is occurring and humans are somewhat responsible, 60% and 30% of them agree with that. And then I should reduce GHG emissions from my farm operation, 23% overall. And as you can see, that same pattern is there. Farmers who believe that climate change is happening, more supportive, and those who do not believe so, less supportive. So a couple of take-home points in my last 45 seconds. A lot of farmers are concerned about predicted climate change-related threats to agriculture in the Corn Belt, but risk perception varies quite a bit, and it's associated with belief. Many support individual level adaptation, also support institutional adaptive action, but much more supportive of extension than state and federal government. And most farmers do not believe that climate change is caused by human activity. And so as we saw, there's that really interesting pattern there that comes through on really all of the questions that we asked. So, we're talking about 60% of farmers that respond to the survey will actually be less supportive to a lot of the things that we talk about, the work that we're doing here. So it's really something we have to think about going forward. I have no more time, so I got the checkered flag. But anyway, we got a lot of stuff coming up, incorporation of other variables and analyses, many more sophisticated analyses that we have planned. One thing that I really want to mention is that we're going to be doing some multi-level modeling, and we do expect that perceptions of climate change perceived risk really will vary spatially across the landscape with the kinds of weather extremes that have been experienced over recent time periods, and so we're going to be controlling for that, which I'm very excited about, and we're going to be working really closely with the extension component and helping to inform extension materials and program going forward. And one of our end games, of course, is to work with the other project objectives to really contribute at a large scale policy and programming focused on developing more resilient agricultural systems here in the Corn Belt. So.